There's a slew of questions that have been sent in, so I'm going to see how many of these we can work through as we go. Doug, you sparked a nerve because there were about 30 questions that came through saying, what does it look like to have people moving from blue states to red states? What does it look like to wipe the blue off their boots? Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I would say that it's the... You're moving from areas of the country which think of themselves as sophisticated and moving to areas that are thought of widely in the media and in the propaganda and so forth as inhabited by rubes and cornpones. And yeah, they're a little bit crazy back where I came from, but I still look down on the people, the general level of education or whatever. I would say the best thing in the world to do is to think to yourself, I'm moving from an area that was run by all the smart people, by all the cool kids, and they wrecked it. Maybe they don't know what they think they know. And maybe I don't know. Maybe I have more assumptions about things that they had on the ball that they didn't really have on the ball. Now, it goes without saying that they really, it's not like they do absolutely everything wrong, and it's not as though you have nothing to contribute where you're going. But I think the best thing in the world to do would be to go in with an attitude of humility, asking, I'm relocating, what can you all teach me about approaching life, or just what can you teach me about living life around here? Don't move to East Toad Flats, Arkansas, and then complain about all the coffee shops that are missing. That's just not done. Yeah, you picked it. You go there. What do you have? What should I learn from this? And the best thing in the world, that you're going to be in a position to contribute something valuable if you go in with an attitude of humility first. And of course, the red staters need to be humble too, and if everybody's got their own arrogance problems and their own temptation problems. But that's what the question was.
Can I ask you a follow-up on that? So what about the situation? Because I think this happens too, where the folks exiting the blue states are actually the most conservative people, period, because they've seen, it's sort of like folks who lived through communism. And they come over, the Cubans are reliably opposed to all forms of socialism because they've seen it up close. And so you've got the situation where someone has seen the belly of the beast and wants nothing to do with it. They've got no blue on their shoes. But then they come into a red state where they haven't seen it up close and personal, and they're sort of a little blasé about it, like, oh, but this is Texas, it could never happen here. Right. And so how would you counsel that person who's moving from California to Texas or Florida, and all the people in the red state are sort of lukewarmish, maybe compromised like you were talking about, and don't realize it, and you're trying to kind of, no, wake up, it could happen here too.
Correct. That's a good area where the blue state folks have something I think really valuable, like East European refugees. Look, I've seen it. This is terrible. You need to be more worked up about this than you are. So there's that, and the red staters are taking everything for granted. It could never happen here. They're on cruise control. So that's a valuable stick a pin in that. But then the next thing to realize is that you've been living in a blue state, you've been living in Connecticut, and for the last 30 years, you and your wife are the most conservative people you've ever met. That you know of, and you've lived, your whole life is thinking of, I'm the most conservative person I know, and then you move to an area and you're the most liberal person you know, and it might take 2 or 3 years to get your mind around that.
Before we proceed, David Goodwin is here, so we can invite him up, and there'll be, or at least he was here. He's like appearing and reappearing and disappearing. It's quite the act. There we go. Mr. David Goodwin, everybody. Welcome back. That's all good. Should we take our suit coats off? There we go. No? Dr. Horner, it's a question for you. Could you hand the microphone there? Pass. Too bad. I'll spare you from some of the limericks that people sent in. I'll spare you those. But somebody asked, you talked a lot about identity and particularly the kind of the modern culture's understanding of it and framing of it and how it's very unbiblical mindset behind how modern people would use the term identity. But can you maybe, the question asks, how do you tie that into personality? And how should we think about when somebody says, well, that's just my personality? Maybe tie those two things together and elaborate on that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, as an academic, I'm always trying to revise my own thinking on things. And I've done talks along those lines for a while and interacted with Dr. Truman from Grove City on it and learned some things from him and some other people. I would kind of say where I am at this point is that identity is very much a rhetorical, politicized construct now that's used to leverage. How dare you? How can you erase me? How can you deny all these things? While I'm kind of an anti-essentialist when it comes to identity, I don't think it's a thing that you can trade like, $1, $2, $3 or $4, $5, $1 bills for a $5 bill or however many quarters that would be. I'm not good at math. The reason that we don't have an actual stable identity is when we're born so broken that the identity that we were designed to inhabit has been evacuated from us. And we are enmity with God. When you are converted, your identity now coalesces around Christ. And so Christians have an identity. Again, I'm not saying that people who aren't Christians don't exist. What I'm saying is they're shattered, right? I mean, that's a very strong piece of Reformed theology. They're shattered, they're broken, they're aimless. So as far as personality goes, I would say that the personality is kind of the symptom of your identity, or what these people will call their identity. So the ways you act, your value system, the way your memories work, how you view yourself, how you have dialogue with yourself. And personality can change and grow over time. A toddler is not the same personality as that same person 40 years later. So I think that they're two kind of distinct entities, if that helps.
Yeah. And I find that, and would you agree with this, that people want to take their either identity or personality, they try to use those somewhat interchangeably, and they want it to be at one moment rigid as Teflon, or as elastic as goo. They want it to be this minute, here's who I am, next minute, it changes.
That's why, I think it's an effective rhetorical theological strategy to make them play by their own rules. Like, oh, so you can transition, that's fine. But you can't detransition, so it's a one-way street. That sounds like you're being a bigot against someone who wants to transit. I thought transition was essentially good in and of itself. So what about the detransitioners who detransition? Right, does this make any sense? It's like a person who flops from one denomination or theological position to another. It's a little bit hard to respect someone like that. Speaking
Shots
as a
fired.
person who was baptized Southern Baptist, was a very confused Nazarene Calvinist for about 5 or 6 years, and then came to a more Calvinist kind of Southern Baptist position. But yeah, right, yeah. I respect longevity. It doesn't mean you can't change your mind.
Any comment?
No.
There you go.
I'd love, feel free, any of you, to dive in on this one. Maybe give a lay of the land for comparing, contrasting the different temptations to folks in the different settings of education they might find themselves in. Say a family with kids in public school, and how do they navigate the waters of getting their kids out? Families that are homeschooling, families that are in classical Christian schools that are maybe wobbly. Maybe help people frame how to navigate some of those transitions, those moves, the dangers and the temptations, particularly I think in homeschooling versus classical Christian, a formal public or private school.
I'll start. I think the center of gravity, wherever you are, my dad was fond of saying, God takes you from where you are, not from where you should have been. And let's say your kids are in the government school, how do we get them out? Your kids are in a nominal Christian school, not that great, what do we do? You've got a bunch of kids and you're homeschooling and it's starting to become overwhelming, what do we do? How do you navigate that? I would say the center of gravity for all parental educational pursuits, no matter where you are, should be the dinner table every night at 6.
Yeah.
All right, so get things squared away there and get on the same page with your wife. If your kids are older, get in sync with them at the dinner table. That's the educational nub.
Yeah.
And then take the show on the road. What are we going to do next?
Yeah. David, do you have any comments on comparing, contrasting?
Yeah. I think I'd say don't overcomplicate it. When I was doing the research for the book, I read a lot on colonial education systems, and they weren't systems. There were parents reading books with their kids, right? And then eventually, if it got out of their reach, they would hire the kid who graduated from a college somewhere in the next town to come over and do 1 day a week. So right now there's a big movement across the country for these things like these micro schools, or sometimes these pod schools, where all you really need to do is find an NSA grad and 5 of you hire them and put them in your basement, your house first week, your house the second week. It's like, I guess that's kind of complicated, but don't think education has to look like a desk with 30 or a room with 30 chairs. It's just, that's not what it is.
Any comments? Merkel, I've got a question for you. Somebody asked, a fair bit of enculturation takes place at home. Even though we send our kids to good Christian schools, are we compromised if we listen to rock and roll, go down to the farmer's market, watch movies, and, I like this part, shop at Old Navy?
Which band?
Depends
on the band.
I think what Doug said earlier about the dinner table really is still the answer to this question. I think absolutely, when our kids were really little, there was a huge wall around them in terms of what they read, what they watched, what they listened to. It was a highly curated list because we were trying to build certain loyalties. But particularly once they start going to school and their friends are talking about this, they come home with questions. And initially, I think one of the skills you want to teach them is to not give a rip that their family is different. And so it's good initially to keep some of those walls up. Yeah, they watch that. We don't in this house. And I think it's good to help them get a sense of, like, I actually don't need to be pressured by those kinds of things. But there does come a point where their questions are no longer coming from a place of insecurity, but just genuine curiosity. I need to understand this, and if I'm going to interact in this world, I need to be able to know what that movie's about. I need to be able to know what that song is about. And I think there comes a point where in that dinner table or in the evening with the family, you are watching those movies. You are reading those books, and you are listening to those songs, but you're doing it as a teacher, teaching them how to apply the schools. Hopefully they're learning at school about how to read a text and how to think critically, and you're teaching them to apply it to pop culture. So yeah, I remember when Hunger Games, comes out, and I didn't care for it, but there was a time when I need to sit and actually read that with my daughter so that she can actually understand the questions that she's getting and the position she's holding. I think it's really important that they learn how to consume pop culture in a thinking and critical way.
Yeah. And that ties in with what you were talking about, Joe, as far as pointing at the world and saying that is rebellion. That is the girl disobeying the dad in the Disney movie, and the dad is the one that asks for forgiveness at the end of the movie. That's rebellion. That's not true reconciliation. That's faux. So it's really naming the world for your kids. Yeah. David, another question for you. Would you allow non-Christian families to send their kids to a classical Christian school? How do you go about, and maybe I'll pair this with another one about, somebody asked about, they've got 80 different churches represented at their classical Christian school. How do you try to keep all those people together, or how do you have an immune system as you guide these various schools under your oversight?
Yeah, I think for a long time, the evangelical school versus the discipleship school People vacillated back and forth. At this point, we're recommending at the ACCS that you keep your school focused on Christians. That you require at least one parent to be a believer. The reason for that is that the tipping scale is balanced a little bit towards only having believers in the school. I think there's value to that. But legally now, if you're offering a public accommodation, the likelihood that you're going to end up getting sued down the road is high. So generally, I think classical Christian schools should be for Christians only. What was the other part of the question?
Maybe like broader evangelical. You've got a sort of melting pot of denominations.
Right.
How do you keep?
Yeah, well, those are two really good questions because they're things we're struggling with. It's hard. Evangelicalism, as Bodhi Baucham mentions in his book Fault Lines, is splitting in two, and the two sides are getting to the point you can't have a foot in both boats. So I would say that the jury's out on that one, but I think we're gonna self-select people who are willing to. We just can't compromise what we teach for the sake of the popularity in the class.
How would you define those two sides?
Well, Vodhi's splitting them along kind of woke lines, and oddly, wokeness is kind of forming a litmus test for whether you believe the Bible or whether you want the Bible to tell you what you want it to tell you. I mean, basically, eisegesis versus exegesis to get the theology in there, and I think that's where the line splitting is along that line.
Someone asked, I think ties in nicely with that. Oh, go ahead.
I think with the multi-denominational thing, I think a big principle would be to distinguish between leadership of the school and attendance of the school. So if you're going to have a bunch, evangelical Christians of all stripes, charismatics, non-charismatics, Presbyterians, Baptists, Bible Church, if you've got a lot of different families, that can work if you've got a core of your board and your headmaster and your faculty that know what they're about, and that's clear and upfront to everybody on the front end. That it gets hard when people come in and think this is a pure democracy, because then you're going to get in a situation where you can get outvoted by someone who's compromised. And so if it's pretty clear, no, this is our school, and we are willing to partner with you, but on these terms as the school, then you can work with all kinds of people, especially if you're doing education well, and you ought to be willing to draw those lines at the leadership level, which gives you some more flexibility at the family level if they're on board with what you're doing.
Can I?
Yeah.
I would just like to add.
Yeah, you would.
I would rather work with somebody that I disagree with on baptism than work with somebody who doesn't think baptism is important. And I think a lot of times our attempt to form an ecumenical sort of cooperation, we achieve it by saying these things aren't important. I think in the body of Christ, we're capable of having a very definite doctrinal position and understanding that other people have a different take. And I can interact with somebody intelligently like that. And we can achieve a great fellowship. But once you just sort of turn it all into a vanilla shake, I think you're losing something really important.
Tying into with what you were talking about, David, with the woke, and particularly how progressives were very successful in conquering the education system. This question notes that progressives started to replace worship of America, the pledge, flag, love America, with hatred of America. No pledge, burn the flag, hate America. So was the love of America in the first instance too close to the love of God, and did it take it far enough for them to destroy society? In other words, was there something in that initial, was there too much patriotism? Was there not enough? Was it conflating love of God with love of country? And should we encourage our schools and whatnot, homeschool co-ops, to say the Pledge of Allegiance and American flags? How would you respond to all that?
Well, the progressives established this program by the mid-1920s, and by the 1950s, you see the rise of the baby boomers. And I think that that's a lot of what you were seeing. If you look at the archetypical 1950s school, everything looks pretty, and you've got the, kind of all the traditional roles and everything, but it's hollow underneath, and it turns into the baby boomer generation, and then subsequently the collapse of morals in the 1970s and that sort of thing. So I think it was always a bad idea. Putting America or any nation in the hearts of kids as the thing that they should be first and foremost allegiant to is, even if you say under God, it's still a broken idea. You can't, the thing that was most impactful to me in this research was America and the West need Christian education, true classical Christian education to sustain them. Nothing else will work. Not American education, not patriotic education. It's just not a place to build that patriotism is in the K-12. It's my opinion.
Yeah. Any other comments or thoughts on that?
To answer the question, no, I would not say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good.
But it's not a sin if you do.
Dr. Horner, a question for you. Somebody asked in their academic institution, and he'll need a microphone, so if somebody wants to, there you go. Unless you can shout really loud.
Can I have two very important personages?
Somebody asked in their academic institution, this probably applies to folks in corporate America as well. They're often asked, he says, we're often asked to start meetings or class by stating our pronouns. As someone who doesn't subscribe to this gender confusion, how do I respond when you're put on the spot in that way, in a simple, God-honoring way that doesn't bring the room to an unnecessary halt?
My pronouns are the English ones. Well, there's different ways you can play it. In that situation, I could just say he, him, without going on to a tirade about how completely foolish all of this stuff is. If I owned a business and I got a job application and someone announced their pronouns were they, them, I would say, look, I'm gonna give you 2 40-hour-a-week jobs. I want you working 80 hours a week, but I'm gonna give you 1 paycheck because I don't know whether you're 1 or 2. That will usually solve that problem. It very much depends on the context. I mean, we've all stood in coffee shops and places and someone has a button, my pronouns are, and I just say, hi, how is your day going, so on and so forth, and I can just avoid their pronouns. And then there are situations where you can get into a discussion about that. I have a lot of, the younger rock climbers that I mentor who are, I live in LA County, so they're young, they're far on the left, and they're young creatives working in the film industry, and, I will hear this they, them, and all these other zeros, all this whatever. And, I always want to ask them, based upon what? Is there 1 of you? Are there 2 of you? Is there 2 of you? Are there 1 of you? And then they're like, well, that's bad grammar. Yeah. Are there 1 of you? Is there 2 of you? Right? And what happens is people are doing that because they are, as I mentioned before, they are so ungrounded. They are so floating in what the French theorists call a sea of signifiers, that they have nothing to plant their feet on. And with people like that, the reason they get angry so quickly if you pressure them is that they know they're trying to make an argument from a position where they have nothing firm to stand on. So I don't necessarily go looking for their fight. Sometimes they come to me, but I won't do it. I do not use the word gender in public settings the way they do. I'll use it as an example with quotes. But I won't do the pronoun thing. And if I was in a, it's not going to happen at Masters because we laugh about all this stuff. But if I was in a position where I was going to be fired because I didn't use their pronouns, then I'd put my resume out there and start looking for a job. I won't do it because then you are co-opted into supporting what is, in the secular world, mental illness. And in the spiritual world, a spiritual pathology. I mean, it's ultimately a sinful kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or you could just tell everybody that your pronouns are His and Majesty.
Exactly. Well, I tell people my pronouns are, and memorize this, I usually use the, Your Exalted Majesty, that's how I want to be addressed. And also part of my pronouns, my plural pronouns, I don't believe any of this stuff and I need you to agree with me right now, right? Repeat that every time you refer to me without my name.
And as the question asker asks, that would bring the room to an unnecessary halt, or a necessary halt. A necessary halt. Yeah. And I would point out in that question there is a time to to throw down. There is a time to.
Sure.
It's going to be awkward. It's going to potentially. You can't fight this battle without coming into contact with the enemy and with those that have been taken captive by these lies and deceptions. Joe, somebody asked you a question. Why does name calling in bullying or misunderstanding? Why does name calling in a bullying or misunderstanding way affect us so deeply? And then how do we strengthen kids not to succumb when the world gives them untrue names?
Well, I mean, so what names matter? So what you're called it's meant to affect you. It's by God's design that what you're called, you own it in a certain way. And one of the things that the gospel is attempting to do is make you not care what the world calls you because you care more about what God calls you. So what does God call you? How did he name you? And therefore, because of that, then you're free to ignore what the world calls you. And there's you are trying to impart to your kids, and that starts with you need to just not care. You have to get to the point where you just don't care what they call you. And it's not because you don't care in an absolute sense, but it's because you care what God calls you. What does God say about this? That's the question. What does God think about this? And then everything else you can deal with. And there's acres of biblical texts that are, they're going to utter all kinds of things falsely about you. They're going to slander you. They're going to malign you. That's baked into the cake. Like, that's just part of the deal. And so with kids, like on the playground with bullying, that's golden opportunity. It's practice. Like, this is just part of it. And it's because, you did something silly, or you're too tall and they're making fun of your height, or whatever the particular feature that they're picking out to pick on is practice for you're a Christian and therefore a bigot and a hater and everything else. And so you're trying to build the fortitude to not care about what the world calls you because you know what God calls you.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I mean, we're supposed to always act in charity. Sometimes charity is in the form of not caring, right? And I don't know if you've ever heard of the geezer's paradox, right? I just turned 59, so I'm now an official geezer. The geezer's paradox is when you're young and you so desperately want to be cool, like the cool kids, like Dr. Merkel was talking about. Cool just means I want to be accepted and I want to be celebrated, as the left likes to say. I want people to like me. We desperately want to be liked, which is the Walmart cheapo version of being loved. Right? Like is not the same thing as love. But the geezer's paradox is when you're young, you desperately want to be cool, which means you want to be accepted. You want to be in the in crowd, the cool kids. But when you become a geezer, you no longer care. You just don't care, which is the coolest thing there is. You wear Crocs,
I have a question for Ben that I need to find here. Somebody asked, Ben, for you, what are your thoughts on using something like Running Start, a government program, to pay for going to college, to a college that accepts it? In other words, how should we think about the various government programs that are available for education?
I don't think a lot of them, to be honest. And the reason is what has generally happened in K-12 education as well as higher education. Our K-12 schools have been dumbed down so much that the average high school graduate is entering college at what used to be basically they're the equivalent of a high school sophomore. We've lost 2, maybe 3 years in our education. Colleges now, their freshman and their sophomore years are generally remedial education. Most colleges, the curriculum, the level of discussion, discourse, and everything is the equivalent of what you would have done back in high school. So students, colleges have to offer a freshman and sophomore year that is remedial, and our junior year picks up basically where college should have started. Now, because of that, what's happening is there are still places that are cranking out kids who are cranking out a decent K-12 degree. So there are places where people are walking out of high school with what used to be the equivalent of a high school education. I think a lot of our classical schools tend to hit at that level. And so you're having students that are coming out of high school, they're showing up at colleges, and they're saying this is just a joke. Usually when I speak to classical Christian schools, I'll tell the students, here's the bad news that I have for you. This school is probably ruining you for most colleges. You're going to show up at college and you're going to say, this class is so beneath what I was doing in high school. And that's really the lay of the land for America. And so we've come up with a number of workarounds where you can try to knock out your freshman and your sophomore year as painlessly as possible. And I think a lot of our Running Start dual credit kind of adequately do that job. And it allows high school graduates to enter college at the junior level. They're basically knocking out an AA while in high school, and then they can enter the junior level. I understand that as a strategy, and I think that I can appreciate that. I can see why people would do that. My reluctance to be enthusiastic about it is a couple of things. First of all, invariably those things tend to be driven again by federal money. And I think that you cannot be cynical enough about federal money. And I think that we ought to get rid of it at every possible turn. There is something really insidious that is happening with the way federal money comes into education. I'm going to steal analogy. He just gave me permission. This is a Joe Rigney observation. Yeah, there we go. Here's just pointing out, like if I came and said, listen, I just point out that I found out about a major donor for your school, gives 60% of your school's budget, and this donor is pro-abortion, pro-gay agenda, and this money is coming to your school so that they can achieve an influence and steer the ideology that your school is conveying to your students. You'd be horrified if that was the case. Okay, welcome to the federal government, federal money on virtually every college campus. You need to be cynical about that. So that's the one thing is I think we got to be careful about the federal money. The second is I don't like that strategy because it concedes that we're just going to college to get a piece of paper. And it concedes that, listen, I'm just trying to figure out the cheapest, fastest, most sort of Dave Ramsey approved way to get to that piece of paper so that I can go on with my life. And once we do that, we have made the concession that I was talking about in my talk where you have made college, you've made education about getting a piece of paper, about getting vocational skills, and you have missed the opportunity to actually build a deep, rich Christian enculturation. So I say education is always enculturation. Trying to just get the piece of paper is still blinding yourself to the enculturation. Rather than trying to get through with them doing as little damage to you as possible, let's turn it around and let's do as much damage as we can as possible, building a true godly enculturation.
Yeah. So, and to add to that, I do think there's something in certain kind of Christian parents, so this maybe some of you, maybe it's people that you know, where there is a kind of like desire to like prove that you could do it. Like that there's a kind of, there's a certain kind of like, well, yeah, but little Johnny graduated from college at 18, you know, and it's a certain kind of like achievement mentality that kind of is a validation of whatever education you've done because we were able to get through college when most people were still getting through high school. And that's misunderstanding the purpose of the education. The purpose of the education is not to beat the pagans in like a race to like a certain age thing. It's to actually form and shape mature adults who love Jesus. That's what you're trying to do. And so whether that happens at 18, 19, 20, 25, whatever, like that's the goal. And so don't play the game that way. And the mentality of parents when they're trying to do that kind of achievement thing, there's something in your own heart that you need to address first so that you can wisely make decisions about your kids' education.
Amen. This is open season for any of you on this one. How would you counsel folks to say they are pulling their kids out of public school, or they're and maybe in-laws or parents feel insulted? You know, well, we went to public school and you went to public school and we all turned out okay and we still go to church and we're Christians. How do you help folks navigate when they make this step of faith to provide a Christian education for their kids and they get either criticism or snark from the family, snark from the in-laws, that sort of thing, and even having maybe nieces and nephews still in the public school, so cousins are playing together. How do you navigate some of those familial relationships in regards to these commitments?
Just quick thing on the first part is I don't think people appreciate just how radically accelerated the transformation has been. Even, I'm only 40, and I went to public high school, public middle school and high school, and then a public university for undergrad. And I just think 20 years, just the radical acceleration of the overt godlessness, both in terms of the classroom, but also just in terms of the wider peer culture. And so when someone's like, I graduated from such and such from that high school in 1975, it was fine for me. And it's like, yeah, you just need to, let's go back. You want to go, let's go down there if we can get in the building, right? Like let's try to go see what they're doing now and see is that what you got? So there might be some of that you could just, a failure to recognize how radically it's changed would be a place to start. Yeah.
I was just going to briefly say, that's the key to me is that you don't know what you don't have. And so I went to public school, but like I said, the progressives had removed the Western Christian paideia from it. So I did not get that. And you don't know what you haven't got. So basically you just have to say what you're missing is something that isn't there. It's not that there's something there that's going to corrupt you. Yes, there probably is. There's something missing.
Yeah, if someone makes an argument like the one you just framed rhetorically, that shows they did not have a classical education. That proves nothing at all, right? Past performance is no guarantee of future, right? What Satan really wants parents to do is to be numbed by their Netflix, so they're unaware of just how bad it's getting and how rapid and how rapidly descending the descent really is. The little public school at the bottom of the hill of my canyon where I live in Los Angeles, like every other school in LA County says, an LA County distinguished school. And I pointed out, I said, every one of your schools has an LA County, we are a distinguished school, which means nothing. There's no distinction at all being distinguished. And 25 years ago, that was kind of okay. And our daughter went there for 2 or 3 years, right? But now it's all rainbowed up.
I would suggest one strategic move. If you're putting your kids in a private classical Christian school and the kids' grandparents object, I would encourage you to just jolly everyone along for a couple of years. If there's going to be a showdown, try to avoid the showdown if you can at the point of enrollment, because after 2 years, the proof is in the pudding, and grandparental pride is going to notice well-behaved children. And I had a friend once whose dad said of his grandkids, "Why are you spanking those kids? They're the best grandkids I've got." So there's a connection. Basically, grandparents, even if they've been affected by all the propaganda and their reflex action is to be critical, don't take the bait to have a flame out. Sometimes you have to just have the showdown, but if you can avoid it, wait till you have some points on the scoreboard that grandparents can say, "Oh," and then you've got a perfect occasion to invite them to talent night or grandparents night, and I would say at Logos School, the single best advertisement that we have generationally for extended families is our graduation ceremonies, because there's such sharp contrast to what goes on in the public school, where it's a joke and it's treated like a joke, and then this is good. So try to get points on the scoreboard before you have the big debate.
Well, with that, let's give another round of applause for these gentlemen. Thank you for your time.